We were so excited for our group getaway. A weekend trip to the mountains, 8 of us staying at a massive Airbnb cabin that looked like it belonged in a luxury magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a hot tub overlooking the forest, and enough rooms for everyone to have their own space. It was supposed to be perfect.
My friend Jess booked it for us. She'd been the one to suggest the trip, and we all Venmo'd her our share without hesitation. Jess was always the planner, always reliable. She'd never given us a reason not to trust her. The first night was amazing. We grilled steaks, played games, and drank too much wine. Around midnight, a few of us went to the hot tub while others crashed early. Jess said she had a headache and stayed inside, but we didn't think much of it. The next morning, I woke up to find the front door wide open. "Who left the door open?" I asked groggily, stepping into the living room. Nobody claimed responsibility, but we all shrugged it off. It was a big house, and with so many people coming and going, it was easy to make a mistake. But then we noticed something strange. My friend Alex's phone was missing. So was Danny's wallet. We searched the house from top to bottom, but they were nowhere to be found. Tensions were rising. Alex accused one of us of taking his phone as a prank, but nobody admitted anything. Jess suggested we just let it go and enjoy the trip, which felt off to me. Why wasn't she more concerned? Later that afternoon, I noticed a black SUV parked at the edge of the driveway. I pointed it out to the group, but Jess waved it off. "Probably just someone lost in the area," she said quickly, her voice a little too casual. That night, things got worse. Around 1 a.m., we heard a loud bang on the front door. Everyone jumped up, panicked, and ran to see what was going on. Jess, however, stayed behind, pretending to be asleep. When we opened the door, no one was there. Just a single slip of paper taped to it that read, "We're watching." That was enough for me. I confronted Jess right then and there. "What's going on?" I demanded. "You've been acting weird since we got here." She denied everything, but her face turned red, and she refused to meet my eyes. I didn't sleep that night. Around 4 a.m., I heard voices outside the cabin. Low, hushed whispers. Peeking through the window, I saw 2 men standing near the SUV, which was now closer to the house. Panic set in. I shook everyone awake, and we decided to leave immediately. But when we went to grab the car keys, they were gone. That's when Jess finally cracked. "I didn't think they'd actually show up," she said, her voice trembling. "What are you talking about?" Alex shouted. She confessed everything. She was in serious debt and had made a deal with some friends to let them rob the cabin in exchange for wiping her slate clean. She didn't know they'd planned to come while we were still there, or so she claimed.
Before we could process what she'd said, the men started banging on the windows, shouting for us to open the door. We barricaded ourselves in the upstairs bedroom, calling the police from the one phone we still had. The next 20 minutes were pure terror, hearing them breaking windows downstairs, shouting threats, and stomping through the house. The sirens scared them off just in time. The police caught the men a few miles down the road. Turns out, they'd been watching us since the moment we arrived, waiting for the right moment to strike. We never spoke to Jess again after that. She tried to apologize, but none of us could forgive her for putting our lives in danger. I haven't gone on a group trip since, and I'll never trust the person organizing the stay without double-checking everything myself. I booked the Airbnb for a weekend getaway, hoping for a quiet retreat to clear my head. The listing promised a charming, secluded cabin in the woods with glowing reviews about the cozy atmosphere and peaceful surroundings. It seemed perfect. The host, Linda, was polite but a bit curt in her messages. She sent a lengthy set of rules. No pets, no parties, no unregistered guests. Standard stuff except for one odd instruction. Do not go into the basement under any circumstances. I arrived just before sunset. The cabin was charming, exactly like the pictures, with a rustic living room, a crackling fireplace, and a well-stocked kitchen. But something felt off. The first odd thing I noticed was the lack of cell service. That wasn't mentioned in the listing, but I figured it was just part of being in the middle of nowhere. There was Wi-Fi though, so I didn't think much of it. As the evening wore on, small things started to bother me. There were no curtains on the windows, which felt unnerving when the sun went down. The woods outside were pitch black, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Around midnight, I heard a noise. It wasn't outside, it came from inside the cabin. A low creak like someone walking on the floorboards. I froze, straining to listen, but the noise didn't come again. I told myself it was just the old house settling and went to bed. The next morning, I noticed something strange. One of the doors in the hallway was slightly ajar. I could have sworn it was closed the night before. Behind it was a staircase leading down, a basement. I remembered Linda's rule and shut the door quickly, trying to shake the uneasy feeling creeping over me. That night, the noises came again, louder this time. Footsteps, unmistakable, moving around the cabin. I grabbed my phone to call someone, anyone, but the Wi-Fi was out. Panic set in. I searched the cabin for anything I could use as a weapon and found a heavy fireplace poker. Clutching it tightly, I crept through the house, checking each room. When I reached the hallway, I saw the basement door wide open. Something moved in the shadows at the bottom of the stairs. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. No response. I stepped closer, gripping the poker until my knuckles turned white. That's when I saw them. Dirty footprints leading up from the basement and into the living room. I turned and ran for the front door, but it wouldn't budge. The lock, which had been fine earlier, was jammed. A voice broke the silence. "You shouldn't be here." I whipped around, my heart hammering. A man stood at the top of the basement stairs, his face gaunt and pale. He was holding something, a knife. Before I could react, he lunged. I swung the poker wildly, hitting him in the arm, and bolted toward the back door. It was unlocked, and I sprinted into the woods without looking back. I ran until I couldn't breathe, eventually stumbling upon a neighboring cabin. The occupants let me in and called the police. When they searched the Airbnb, they found the basement filled with cameras, hidden ones that had been installed throughout the cabin. The man, who turned out to be Linda's brother, had been living down there, watching every guest who stayed. Linda claimed she didn't know, but I didn't buy it. The listing disappeared shortly after, and I've never booked an Airbnb again. Sometimes I wonder how long he'd been watching me before I heard those footsteps. Or what would have happened if I'd ignored the rule about the basement. Being a travel nurse means I'm constantly on the move, staying in temporary housing for weeks at a time. It's not glamorous, but I've gotten used to it. When I accepted an assignment in a small, remote town, I found a cozy-looking Airbnb just 15 minutes from the hospital. The listing showed a charming one-bedroom guest house, separated from the main property by a thick line of trees. It seemed private and safe, which was all I really needed. The host, Diane, was friendly in her messages. She assured me the place was quiet and perfect for a working professional. I arrived late on a Sunday evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The guest house looked exactly like the pictures: warm lighting, a small kitchen, and a comfy bed. The first few nights were uneventful. After long shifts at the hospital, I'd come back, shower, eat, and collapse into bed. But by the third night, things started to feel off. I was sitting on the couch scrolling through my phone when I noticed movement outside the window. It was just a shadow, but it was enough to put me on edge. I got up, turned on the porch light, and looked outside. Nothing. Just the trees swaying in the breeze. I convinced myself it was my imagination. I'd been working long hours and was probably overtired. The next night I heard footsteps. They were faint but deliberate, crunching on the gravel path outside the guest house. I froze, my heart racing. I peeked through the curtains but didn't see anyone. Probably an animal, I whispered to myself, trying to stay calm. Still, I double-checked the locks on all the doors and windows before going to bed. At around 2 a.m., a loud thud woke me up. It sounded like something or someone hitting the side of the house. Grabbing my phone, I turned on the flashlight and tiptoed to the window. That's when I saw him. A man in a mask, standing just outside the guest house, staring directly at my window. The mask was white and featureless, and his head tilted slightly as if he were studying me. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. My first instinct was to call the police, but before I could dial, he moved, stepping closer to the window. I panicked and bolted to the bathroom, locking the door behind me. My hands trembled as I called 911, whispering to the operator about the man outside. "Stay on the line," she said. "Officers are on their way." Then I heard it, the sound of the doorknob jiggling. He was trying to get inside. I pressed myself against the bathroom door, clutching a pair of scissors I'd grabbed from the counter. The operator kept talking, but her voice felt distant, drowned out by the sound of my own heartbeat. Minutes felt like hours. The jiggling stopped, but then came the sound of glass shattering. He was in the house. I held my breath, listening to his footsteps as they moved through the guest house. He was slow, deliberate, like he was taking his time. Then silence. The next sound I heard was the wail of sirens. The man must have heard them too because the footsteps stopped abruptly. When the police arrived, they found the guest house empty. The shattered window was their only clue that someone had broken in. They searched the surrounding area but found no sign of the man. Diane, the host, showed up not long after, horrified by what had happened. She claimed nothing like this had ever occurred before, but the way her voice trembled made me wonder if she was telling the truth. The officers assured me they'd patrol the area through the night and suggested I find somewhere else to stay. I packed my things immediately and booked a hotel room in town. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At the hospital, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the masked man lurking in the shadows. My co-workers noticed my jumpiness, but I didn't tell them what had happened. I didn't want to seem paranoid. That evening, I stopped by the guest house to grab a few items I'd left behind. As I approached, I noticed something on the porch, a small white mask, the same kind the man had been wearing. My stomach dropped. I called the police again, and they came to investigate, but there were no fingerprints, no clues, nothing to indicate who had left it. I never went back to the guest house after that. Diane refunded my stay and apologized profusely, but I could tell she was just as shaken as I was. Even now, weeks later, I can't stop thinking about the man in the mask. I booked the Airbnb for a quick getaway after a stressful few months. The listing was a cozy little cabin on a quiet piece of property, owned by a friendly-sounding couple named Mark and Lisa. The reviews were stellar. Everyone gushed about how helpful the hosts were and how charming the cabin was. When I arrived, Mark was waiting on the porch. He was friendly, a little too much so, greeting me with a wide smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Lisa came out shortly after, offering a pitcher of lemonade. "We like to welcome our guests personally," she said, her voice overly cheerful. They insisted on showing me around the cabin, even though it was small enough to figure out myself. Mark pointed out every little detail. "We've got a state-of-the-art thermostat, just in case it gets chilly. And don't worry, the Wi-Fi password is written on the fridge." Lisa laughed at everything Mark said, her laugh high and brittle like she was forcing it. Finally, they left, reminding me to call if I needed anything. The first night was fine, quiet and peaceful. But as I lay in bed scrolling through my phone, I felt exposed. I chalked it up to being in an unfamiliar place and eventually fell asleep. The second night, things got weird. I was in the living room, flipping through TV channels when I noticed a small red light blinking in the corner of the ceiling. At first I thought it might be a smoke detector, but when I looked closer, it was definitely a camera. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. Why would there be a camera in the living room? It wasn't mentioned in the listing. Feeling uneasy, I grabbed a chair and reached up to inspect it. It wasn't connected to anything obvious. No wires, no markings, just a small black device. I unplugged it and placed it on the coffee table. That's when I started looking around. In the kitchen, I found another one tucked in the corner of the ceiling. In the bathroom, hidden behind a decorative plant. And then, in the bedroom, a tiny lens embedded in the base of the alarm clock. My heart was pounding now. I grabbed my phone and called Mark. "Oh, those are just security cameras," he said casually. "You can never be too careful these days." "In the bathroom?" I snapped. There was a long pause before he replied, "That must be a mistake. Let me come over and fix that for you." I hung up and packed my things immediately. As I was throwing my clothes into my bag, I heard a car pull up. I peeked out the window and saw Mark and Lisa standing by their truck, whispering to each other. Mark was holding something in his hand. A toolbox, maybe. I froze, debating whether to confront them or just leave. Before I could decide, I heard the sound of the front door unlocking. They had a spare key. I bolted out the back door, sprinting through the woods with my bag slung over my shoulder. I didn't stop until I reached the main road, where I flagged down a passing car and begged them to take me to the nearest police station. The police took my report and searched the cabin the next day. They found multiple hidden cameras, all of them recording directly to a private server. Mark and Lisa were arrested, but the case fell apart when they claimed the cameras were for safety and denied placing any in the bathroom or bedroom. I've tried to move on, but I can't help but wonder how many other guests they watched and what they did with those recordings. When I booked the Airbnb, I had no idea a snowstorm would hit. The listing showed a cozy cabin deep in the woods, perfect for a weekend escape from city life. The host assured me it was well stocked and ready for winter weather. I imagined myself curled up by the fire, sipping hot cocoa and reading a book while the snow fell outside. The first day was everything I'd hoped for. The snow started that evening, soft flakes blanketing the forest, muffling every sound. I built a fire, made some tea, and settled into the silence. By the second day, the storm had intensified. The snow piled up to the windows, and the wind howled against the walls. I lost cell service, but I wasn't worried. I had plenty of food, and the cabin had a backup generator according to the listing. That night, the power went out. I fumbled for the flashlight I'd packed and lit a few candles. The fireplace still worked, so I wasn't completely in the dark. But the silence felt heavier, the kind that pressed against your ears. I bundled up and decided to check on the generator, which the host said was in a small shed out back. The snow was waist deep, and the cold bit through my jacket as I trudged through the drifts. The shed was about 50 feet from the cabin, a little structure barely visible through the swirling snow. As I got closer, I noticed tracks in the snow, large ones, bigger than any animal I'd ever seen. My stomach tightened. I shone the flashlight on the tracks, following them around the side of the shed. That's when I heard the low growl. I froze. A massive bear emerged from the trees, its black eyes locked on me. Its fur was matted with snow, its breath visible in the freezing air. For a second, neither of us moved. Then it charged. I screamed and ran back toward the cabin, the snow slowing me down as I stumbled and fell. The bear was close, too close. I could hear it snarling behind me. My hands fumbled for the cabin door, and I managed to slam it shut just as the bear's weight crashed against it. The door held, but the bear didn't give up. It pawed at the wood, growling and roaring, its massive body blocking the small window. I backed away, my heart pounding, and grabbed the only weapon I could find, a fire poker. The bear eventually moved away, but I knew it was still out there. I could see its shadow pacing through the snow, circling the cabin. I spent the rest of the night huddled by the fire, clutching the poker and praying the door would hold. When morning finally came, the bear was gone, but its tracks were everywhere, circling the cabin, leading up to the windows and back toward the woods. The storm had calmed, and I decided to make a break for it. The nearest road was about 2 miles away, and I knew staying in the cabin wasn't an option. I grabbed my backpack, wrapped myself in every layer I had, and stepped out into the snow. Every step was a gamble, my eyes constantly scanning the woods for any sign of movement. Somehow, I made it to the road, where a plow driver spotted me and picked me up. When I told him what happened, his face went pale. "Bears don't usually attack like that," he said. "Must have been desperate from the storm." I'll never forget the look in its eyes, the cold, unrelenting hunger. Needless to say, I'm sticking to hotels from now on. I wasn't expecting much when I booked the Airbnb. It was last minute, cheap, and conveniently close to the small town where my cousin was getting married. The listing showed a spacious Victorian-style home, split into several rental units. My room was on the top floor with a shared kitchen and bathroom. Not ideal, but I figured it would do for a weekend. The host, Greg, had a 5-star rating, though his profile picture, a blurry, overly friendly grin, gave me pause. When I arrived, Greg greeted me at the door with that same unsettling smile. He was polite but overly chatty, lingering as I brought in my bags. "You're in room 4, he said, leading me up the creaky staircase. "Got everything you need up there. Nice view of the woods out back, too." The room was clean, but bare bones. A bed, a small desk, and an old wardrobe. The door had a lock, which I immediately tested. "You're the only guest this weekend," Greg said before leaving. "So, make yourself at home." The first night was uneventful. I went out for the wedding rehearsal dinner and came back late, exhausted. But as I was brushing my teeth, I noticed something odd in the bathroom mirror. A faint outline of a door frame on the opposite wall. It wasn't a door, though, just a smooth surface that looked like it had been plastered over. Curious, I ran my hand along it. The wall felt thinner there, hollow. I dismissed it as part of the house's old design and went to bed. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of something heavy moving above me. The problem? I was on the top floor. I stood still, listening, It sounded like slow, deliberate footsteps, followed by a faint scraping noise. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was an animal on the roof. But as the day went on, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. That night, I locked my door and pushed the desk in front of it. I didn't feel safe. Around midnight, I heard it again. The footsteps, heavier this time, seemed to move above me, then to the wall behind the wardrobe. My pulse quickened as I heard a faint rhythmic tapping, like someone drumming their fingers on the wall. Gathering my courage, I moved the wardrobe. Behind it was another plastered-over door. My stomach sank. Suddenly, I heard a creak in the hallway, just outside my room. I froze, listening as the footsteps paused directly in front of my door. The doorknob rattled once, twice, before going still. I stayed up the rest of the night, clutching my phone, ready to call 911. At sunrise, I decided I wasn't staying another minute. As I was loading my car, Greg appeared out of nowhere. "Leaving already?" he asked, his grin tighter than before. "Yeah, early start," I mumbled, avoiding his eyes. As I drove away, I couldn't help but glance back at the house. In one of the top-floor windows, I saw a shadow move, a figure standing there, watching me leave. I never reported it. I didn't want to know what was behind that plastered-over door. I booked the Airbnb to escape the city for a while and focus on my writing. The listing promised a secluded cabin tucked into the mountains, perfect for a quiet retreat. The host, Sarah, seemed nice enough through our brief messages, but what sold me were the photos of the wraparound porch and the cozy fireplace. When I arrived, the place looked just like the pictures, except for one thing. A car was parked in the driveway. It wasn't Sarah's, as she told me she wouldn't be on site during my stay. Thinking it might belong to a previous guest, I shrugged it off and went inside. The cabin was warm and welcoming, though a little dusty, like it hadn't been cleaned thoroughly in a while. A handwritten note from Sarah sat on the counter. "Make yourself at home. Let me know if you need anything." The first night was uneventful. I spent the evening unpacking and drafting some notes for my project. The cabin was silent except for the wind rattling the windows. It felt lonely, but in a way I'd been craving. The second day, things started feeling off. As I was walking through the living room, I noticed something odd, a glass of water on the coffee table. I hadn't left it there. In fact, I hadn't poured myself water at all, chalking it up to my own forgetfulness. I dumped the glass and carried on. But later, while I was cooking dinner, I swore I heard footsteps upstairs. I froze, straining to listen, but the sound stopped. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. No answer. Grabbing the nearest object, a heavy frying pan, I crept upstairs. Each room was empty, though the air felt wrong, like someone had been there moments before. That night, I locked the bedroom door and shoved a chair under the knob. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of whispering. It was faint, coming from somewhere in the house. I pressed my ear to the bedroom door, heart pounding. The whispers were low, almost conversational, but I couldn't make out any words. The next morning, I texted Sarah to ask if anyone else had access to the cabin. Her reply sent a chill through me. "No one else should be there. Are you sure everything's okay?" Determined to get to the bottom of it, I searched the cabin. In the closet of one of the guest rooms, I found a trap door leading to a crawl space. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years, but something about it felt off. When I opened it, the stench hit me first. Stale, sour, like rotting food. Inside were blankets, empty food wrappers, and a small pile of personal belongings. A flashlight, a notebook, and photos. Photos of me. My blood ran cold. The photos weren't recent. They were from years ago, taken in public places. I didn't waste time. I grabbed my essentials and bolted, leaving the rest of my things behind. As I drove away, I saw movement in the rearview mirror, someone stepping out onto the porch watching me leave. I reported it to the local police, but they didn't find anyone at the cabin or in the surrounding area. Sarah apologized profusely and took down the listing, but I never heard what became of the investigation. Now, every time I stay somewhere new, I check every closet, every corner, and every crawl space. I'll never shake the feeling that someone might still be watching.